Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast bringing guests together to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. From entrepreneurs to vendors, higher education to corporate leaders, we'll uncover their perspective regarding the latest trends and technologies impacting your career or business. Our podcast is made possible by Downing EdTech Consulting, where people and technology connect. Hosted by Cher Downing, an experienced executive spanning a higher education and corporate career with specific focus on the EdTech industry. Dr. Downing is also an international and national presenter, author, and regular media contributor. Now here is your host, EdTech strategist, Dr. Cher Downing.
Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast where we bring guests to share their experience and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. Our goal is to provide you with products, services, and knowledge that can help benefit you or your business. I'm Cher Downing, your host, and I want to introduce today's guest, Kris Marsh. Hi, Kris. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me to have a conversation with you.
I'm so excited that you're here. Kris and I have known each other for several years now, and she has a very unique space that I wanted to bring to all of you today because I think it's something that is really becoming more and more important, particularly with the pandemic and how we are navigating and changing our businesses and looking for new opportunities. So Kris comes to us from Michigan, where she specializes in working with family business consulting. And I think that is something we're going to see much, much more of nationwide as people start to reevaluate their roles. Maybe they've had an opportunity to leave a job and are looking to do something else. Or maybe even they're just in line to inherit a business or to work with their family on one. So, Kris, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about what your business does.
Yeah, I began consulting in 2013 after I'd spent about 15 years working in marketing and strategy at a Fortune 500 corporation. And at that time, I just felt like there was something more meaningful that I was meant to do with my experience and with my time, and particularly was interested in working with family-owned businesses to help them be as successful as they could be. But like everyone who launches a business, I had a lot to learn during that first year. And after a really successful launch, I started having people ask me what I did to be able to launch myself essentially as a brand so well. And I didn't know. I didn't know the answer. So I had to spend some time reflecting, and I realized that what I did was to apply what I knew about marketing from my background to myself as a marketable brand. And so that started an offshoot of work that I do as well with personal brand coaching, and then ultimately to the development of the personal brand playbook, which has some technology components as well. So that's the work that I've been doing for the past, I guess it's been 7.5 years now. Time flies. And what I think is really interesting as I was considering the conversation we were going to have today is that EdTech really does touch everything that we do, because rather than looking at it with a siloed point of view as education technology, rather than looking at it with a siloed point of view as educational technology, it's really about knowledge and information sharing and the effective way that we do that. So of course that applies to education, but when you think about it, it applies to everything that we do in business. So I just thought that was interesting as I was considering our conversation, and I was trying to think of any work that I do that isn't somehow impacted by the concepts of EdTech, and I couldn't think of any.
So I joke with people that a year ago, nobody understood what I did in my business. And a year later, because everyone suddenly was entirely immersed in some form of ed technology, suddenly everyone understands what I do. And I really haven't had a conversation with any of them. It's the way of the world. You're absolutely right. So I want to talk a little bit about what are types of things that you see with your small businesses in terms of embracing technology, adopting technology, educating their staff. How are you seeing that impact from EdTech into those, even the smallest of businesses? Maybe they're one or two people shops.
It's interesting how different my answer would have been 6 months ago versus now in the middle of COVID and what it's forced businesses to do and adopt and get comfortable with. So initially, what I would say is coming out of that Fortune 500 environment 7.5 years ago and working with family-owned businesses, it always was, and it continues to be about working with them at a point of transition where they're ready for their next level of growth. And they're trying to figure out the vision, the strategy, and the mechanisms to make that happen. So I've always talked to these family-owned businesses about technology, but in the past, it really centered around making them more effective and more efficient in terms of automating pieces of their business processes to make jobs easier, to have better channels for communication with their customers. And so there was that automation piece for efficiency, but it was also about the effectiveness of if you automate some pieces of this process that you have, it allows you to gather and data to be able to then go back and look and find answers or insight that you didn't recognize before.
Sure.
So that was a lot of the conversation that I used to have. It really would center around that. Fast forward now to 2020, and it's much more than that. It really centers around helping them work more effectively remote from each other. So that's a big piece of it. And so some of that is coaching with them and consulting with them and helping them find things like Zoom, like we're on today, and helping them understand how to use that to get the strategy work done. But I would say even more so, it's a conversation about how do you effectively reach your customers right now when those channels that you were used to are gone. So here's an interesting project that I got to work on this year. I actually started consulting with a Fortune 100 in 2020, back in January, before we knew any of this was going to happen with the global pandemic and this major shift and disruption in channels to market. So when you think about that size of a corporation, a really big channel for them to reach their customers are through conferences and trade shows. And I think
sure.
It is for a lot of us, particularly at that level. They spend a huge portion of their marketing budget going to these face-to-face events. So we had been working toward the planning for their biggest trade show of the year, which was set to take place in mid-May.
Oh.
And when that event was canceled at the beginning of March, that major channel to connect with their audience was severed. And they had planned a product launch there. So now what do you do? So
Wow.
It really is about, and I think this is an important point in EdTech, or really anything in business, is you have to go back to the base of why are you doing it in the first place? What was the objective? What was the reason why you were going? Because I think otherwise people panic a bit. And when that channel was severed, they just don't know what to do.
Sure.
And so
sure.
It's pulling back and reassessing what was the reason for being there. And what we mapped out was there are reasons why, first of all, the architects for this particular show, there's a reason why they're going. They're going because they need to learn. They have continuing education units that are required every year, just like a lot of industries do. They're going there to connect with their peers, and they're going there to be able to engage with the experts and learn new trends. So we had to not just be focused internally, but to really think about the fact that this was creating a gap for the other side of this equation as well. And then, of course, for the company, they're going to promote themselves as thought leaders. They're going to launch new products. They're going so that they can connect. And of course, ultimately, they're going so that they can generate leads.
Sure, absolutely. And it's an interesting point that you make, because I think for anyone, as you said, even in your personal life, there becomes a time where you do things because you've always done them. And when you work in a company or you work in a business, even if you're a college student or maybe you're working in a small retail store, you'll hear the comment that, well, we've always done that. There's never really an explanation of why we do it. Is it still valuable? How will it impact us? All of those things. And so we do become creatures of habit. And we don't always assess that it's really a worthwhile project to still be doing. We just know we've always done that. And so I think it's fascinating that this has probably forced a lot of businesses to reevaluate what they're doing, not just from a monetary value, but really what's the overall value and the return on investment that they're getting from it.
Absolutely. So this is a time for businesses and leaders to be bold. I really think that there's a silver lining here of an opportunity that's been created. And this is my big prediction. And we'll come back in a couple of years, we'll listen to this episode and we'll see if this comes to fruition. But I really believe that this is going to force us to find different ways of doing business. It already is. But my prediction is that is going to actually lead to us finding better ways of doing business that we wouldn't have tried before if we hadn't been forced to, because we're stuck in that belief that there's a way to do things. This is the way it's done. So let me circle back to this project, and I'll give you a specific example of an outcome related to that. So
excellent.
This organization would have never considered not going to this trade show. You're crazy if you don't. It's just the way things are done. Mm-hmm. So when this trade show canceled, the first thing that I asked the team was, are they going to consider making this a virtual event? That's the first question that we need to ask. We need to find out what our options are. So we went to the event organizers and asked them. And by the way, this was about 6 weeks out from the event at this point when they finally canceled, and asked them that question if they were going to convert it to a virtual event. And they very quickly said, no, there's no way we can pull something like this off in 6 weeks. That's insane. And so we came back together internally as a team, and I asked them the question, do we think we're crazy enough to do it?
Sure.
And
absolutely.
That's what I mean about be bold. So this was a crazy idea that we never would have had the guts to try, or I should say, I'm maybe just crazy enough to try it, but I think I would have had a really hard time talking this team into it. But in 2020, it's almost that feeling of what do we have to lose? And
exactly.
So it's that time to be bold. And so we did it. We pulled off a virtual summit in 6 weeks' time. And again, the reason that it was important, and so back to this concept of EdTech is not just about the technology, it's about considering who the technology is for and what the objective is for using it. And so we knew that these architects were also feeling this gap and this sense of loss of learning, connection, engagement. The company had objectives that they needed to meet. And so we worked really hard over the course of that 6 weeks to find the right technology platform that would allow us to deliver the continuing education content, to be able to track who participated in those modules, to be able to report those credits back where they needed to be reported. But it was much more than that. It was also a platform that allowed personal engagement and connection with industry roundtable discussions and Q&As and virtual happy hours and virtual coffee breaks. we built some really cool stuff into this. And so what I'm really excited to say is that although this is not something that anyone would have had the guts to try to pull off last year, the ROI proves that it worked even better than being face-to-face.
Wow.
And just based on my experience working at these large trade shows, generally someone's going to spend 5 or 10 minutes when they stop by your booth. If you're lucky and they're really interested, you might get a half hour out of them.
Yes. Most of them look for free swag.
Yes, exactly. And so what we found is that we not only quadrupled times 4 the number of leads that they generated, but we had over a 90% retention rate over the course of 2 days for a full 8 hours of engagement with those people. And they were much more highly engaged as well because they were interacting the whole time, engaging with each other, engaging with the experts through this virtual event.
And you made a memorable event that people are going to have that resonate with them and talk about, which is going to gain you even more traction. One of the things we've always talked about in online is that it's very different. It's not personable as much as it can be in face-to-face. But I think some of the points you made are exactly right. What you do find is a much more captive audience, and you have better ways to really measure how their experience is and what they're doing. When you go to a trade show, you can look around the ballroom and you can say, yes, there's, wow, a couple thousand people in here, but they're mulling around. You don't actually know that they're getting anything out of it. So what you did was really twofold, getting the information out to that target audience, but also doing it in a way that was meaningful and impactful to them.
And that's the power of technology. And that's why I said I really know that we're going to find better ways of doing business that we would have been hesitant to use before, because not everyone is as comfortable with technology as you are. Share, should they be, right? That's what you do for a living. But it was such a magnified demonstration of the power of technology. So, like I said, over the last 7 years, I talked to family businesses about the power of automating pieces of their process so that they get data points, they get this information that they may not have had before, and insights. And every time we find that they were making assumptions that didn't turn out to be true. And so it changes where they're investing in their business. I think this is just a magnified version of the power of technology to be able to see, as you said, we aren't making assumptions by looking around a ballroom and kind of paying attention to where we think people are congregating. We were able to see who connected, when they logged in, exactly which segments of the program they stayed connected for, how long they stayed connected, how many times they answered a question, how many times they raised their hand, how many times they shared the hashtags on social media. And so you can imagine how powerful that is, even just to be able to score the leads and to be able to say to that sales organization, here are 400 people you better call like today, because their scores were off the charts. They were in there, engaged the entire time, and they engaged in 12 different ways.
The other issue is they also are creating relationships that you're not even getting any data on. So they are now finding new people to connect with within those groups. They're now talking about not only what they can do for each other and understand how each other's businesses and outlines look, but they also start to talk about, so, this was a fantastic event, and how did you get involved, and who was responsible for it? So even just the pipeline of potential that you've designed inadvertently in there for people to come back to your company or to you and say, wow, we'd like to do something like this as well. How did you pull this off? I mean, there's never wasted energy in putting together something like this.
Yeah. And the power of community. And I think that's really what drew me to working with family-owned businesses and coming out of that corporate world. And as I said, obviously, with what I just discussed, I still do get pulled in to consult with those large corporations because I have a background there. And so when they're looking to do something different, I'll come in and work with them on that. But that sense of community, so it's connection with that company, absolutely. It's also about that company being memorable as a thought leader in that space. The ones who were bold and came out and did something different and filled a gap that the customers had been left with. But also that sense of community with each other. One unexpected outcome that I was really excited to see within the first week after the event, when we went out and started looking at the numbers on social media, is that just through the tagging and the sharing and them talking to each other and mentioning the event, the organization, this company got 110,000 organic social media engagement, tags and people sharing in an age when businesses really feel like they have to pay to be able to get really great coverage on social media. And frankly, a lot of times you do. But again, back to this idea of being reminded of why we do what we do and finding better ways to do them. I think the reason that happened, frankly, is because there wasn't a hyper focus on that social aspect so much as there was on the event itself, because we had such a short period of time to pull it off. And we realized after the fact that the reason it was so successful on the social channels is that through this event, it had allowed people to connect and engage with each other. And then social media was this nice bonus where people who weren't usually connected, and they're spread all over not just the country, but North America. Social media is the place where they're going to continue to connect with each other. And so a really nice bonus for the company was within, less than the first week, as I said, 110,000 different interactions on social media that were completely organic.
So, it's interesting that you bring that up, because there's still a real dividing line between social media, the people who believe in it and the people that don't. And oftentimes a business owner or a company will say to you, that's not really where our audience is. And in this day and age, and particularly amplified with the pandemic, that's where everybody is living right now. You have a captive audience who is out there scrolling through, if for no other reason, they're just bored. But what we're finding is that people are looking for that referral, that recommendation, and it's no longer reaching out to someone. It's not, I'm going to pick up the phone and say, hey, Kris, where do you think is the best, whatever I'm looking for. I'm going to look on social media and see what people are responding to. Amazon figured this out several years ago when they said, hey, if you like this product, somebody else bought this one with it. Now, you never know who Miss Bunny 33 is at yahoo.com, but for some reason you trust her because she bought the product that you picked out after researching. And so you figure, if she bought it, she bought something else. So Amazon has figured out that we like to have someone else who's had an experience. We like to read a review. We're more apt to buy something because of a sense of community that someone else is using it, that someone else will tell you upright, it's a great product. Here's the one downfall, but it's pretty minimal. I'm still going to keep it. Social media is doing that for us on a much broader expansion. And we have the opportunity to get into people's view with very minimal effort. And I think your point to the fact that it doesn't have to always be about money. When you build a great product, people will talk about it. And when people talk about it, a conversation starts and it moves that forward. That's where the value in social media is. We can be inundated with ads all day long, but we're inundated with ads all day long on the radio, on podcasts, on television, even driving by billboards. The difference is social media becomes not just advertising, but a conversation and a community of people who start to have like thoughts, looking for similar products, want a similar experience. And there's a lot more experience seekers on there than there used to be because they are looking for something new. They are looking for fresh ideas and how to work through these things. So I think it's fascinating. You've conducted your own little experiment without even realizing it, to have data and to look at, here's something new and innovative and fresh that can be done. And we actually did better than when we started out, but we also changed the industry. I mean, there's no going back from what you've done now. Even if you never did it again, you will forever be recorded as the year when there was a pandemic, they stepped forward and they were still there. That's a powerful message from a company in a time where we're seeing lots of things shut down, lots of issues going on with them. So that's just a fascinating situation that you've been in. And of course, having you deal with that, I know they probably had no idea what they were in for when you said, there's another way we can do this. Because knowing you, Kris, one of the best things about you is you always are looking at the solution to a problem. You're always looking at what's the impact, what can we do different? How are we going to still make your company, your business, your brand look great in the best possible light? So talk to us a little bit about what you do with companies and branding, and then also what you do for personal branding.
So personal branding and the work that I do there with business leaders and business professionals really happened by accident. So as I said, when I started consulting 7 years ago, it was really to consult with family-owned businesses. And so that still is most of the work that I do, or the work that I do with personal brand coaching with executives and business leaders was not an intentional design when I started consulting in 2013. I started consulting working with family-owned businesses and really focused on helping them with strategic planning. So developing a really clear vision for their future, helping them then design measurable and specific objectives, the strategies that support those, and then helping their teams to build out those action plans and those project plans and coaching them through the work to get there. So that's still a big piece of the work that I do. The personal brand coaching was the result of having launched my business successfully in the first year and having people come to me and start asking, how did you do that? And I realized that I didn't really know the answer to that. And so, as I said earlier, I had to reflect and think back, and I realized really what I was doing was just applying the basic principles of marketing. And it came down to 4 steps that I had to go through over the course of that 12 months to be able to build a successful personal brand, which is what all of us are based on. Any of us who are a coach or a consultant, we're selling ourselves. And once I had figured that out, I started working with people because they asked me to. And I started coaching them through this personal brand process to first assess and really get clear on and real with themselves on what their brand is today, because every one of us have a personal brand today, whether we realize it or not. And if we are not managing it, other people are managing it for us. We may not like the direction that they take it. So first of all, to get real and do the work to understand what your brand is today, then to get intentional, to make a choice about what you want it to be going forward and to build a plan around that. So really this idea of doing an assessment, a situational analysis, if you will, of where am I today, building that vision of where you want to be, developing a plan to support it, and then clearly communicating and executing on that. That's really a mini strategic plan that you're building for yourself. And that is kind of the basis of the personal brand coaching that I do with individuals, with business leaders now. It's essentially designing that strategic planning process for individuals in the same way that I do for family-owned businesses.
It's so powerful that you are pushing the envelope for people to think of themselves and what they project out. Because I think we live in a society where you maybe go to school, learn a trade, get a degree, and you move into a role and you become that role. And you almost get lost in that role. People only think of you in that role. And when you want to leave a role, it becomes very difficult then to rebrand yourself or to even just be acknowledged that you're doing something different. But I do love the fact of assessing where you are and how you're being managed, because you don't often think of that. You don't often think about how things are going out. And it can be something as simplistic as how your name is utilized up into everything that really makes your kind of vision that comes to people's minds when they think of you. And I think of this in terms of, I worked with someone for a long time whose first name was John. Everyone called him Johnny. And one day I said to him, I said, why do they call you Johnny? And he said, because somebody did the first day and I never corrected anyone. He goes, I don't really like that name. My name is John. And when I first started working with you, that was one of the things that I thought of. And I thought, wow, so his whole brand was Johnny. And Johnny is a youthful name. He was not a youthful person at that point, visually. And so coming to the table with new ideas and trying to sell things, the name didn't resonate for people, because they were like, oh, that's just Johnny. He's got another great idea, but I don't know. It wasn't as impactful as if John would have come to the table. And obviously there's other characteristics he would have needed to work with as well. But he started off the conversation poorly, just right then and there, And so that's just a small example of it. I'm sure you see much, much bigger examples of that. But having a mini plan for yourself is such a great idea. What do you do then when you have an individual brand and then you also have a business brand? How do you meld those two?
I see people that are trying to cleanly, completely separate those two pieces of themselves all the time. And inevitably, they figure out that they can only continue to do that for so long because it's you, right? You are selling yourself. And so you can only manage a facade for so long before it catches up with you. And so authenticity is so important. So, for example, the place that I most often see it catch up with people, so back to thinking about technology, is on social media. So most people will have a separate business page and accounts on social platforms for their business, and then they have their personal accounts. I don't care how tightly you have those personal accounts locked down to friends and family. The world is a really small, interconnected place. And so if you are portraying one persona on your business accounts and you really are someone else authentically, it's going to catch up with you and people are going to figure that out. So that's really where I see people lose control is on social media. And then once people see that you're portraying something that's not authentic, you've lost their trust. And it's going to be really hard to get it back. So that authenticity really carries over or needs to carry over into every aspect of what you do. I believe personally as well as professionally, that really is one of my core values, especially after having spent so long in the corporate world. I knew when I left, one of the things I was really seeking was the opportunity to just be authentically myself. And so when you talk about people and businesses struggling to be successful on social media or believing that they have to pay a lot of money, and you do have to pay for ads, don't get me wrong. But what we found in the example of that virtual 2-day event is a good one, is that when you just make it about connecting with people and when you're authentic and you're real and you're personable and you're authentic, that's what people are drawn to. And when you think about marketing, because I have a long background in marketing, you'll often hear it referred to as either B2B or B2C. Are you a B2B marketer? Do you market business to business? Or are you a B2C marketer? You market from business to consumer? When in fact, it's all about people to people. I don't care if you are a big business that is selling a widget or a service to another business. It is a person on the other end of both of those phone lines. And people don't want to connect with a robot. They're looking for that personal experience regardless. And so it's that authenticity that I think is really key to, one, being honest with yourself about what your brand is today, that situational assessment. It is that authenticity in developing your vision of who you want to be. And again, don't make it a facade. It needs to be authentic to you. It's that authenticity then in building out that plan that is not just about the steps to be successful, but how are you going to leverage your strengths and your talents and your gifts to be able to live that brand, to be able to create that vision that you have for yourself and your life. And then how are you going to communicate that authentically? So that's something that I believe is really transferable between a business brand and a personal brand as well. It's important on both sides.
I think that is such fantastic advice. And I hope our listeners get an opportunity to just sit down and do a little sketching about themselves, because right now we are in a time where even though the country is desperately trying to go back into the offices and back into the workforce, we're hitting another pause button. And we don't know how long this pause is going to be. We don't know how many more pauses are coming down the road. So a lot of your authenticity and a lot of your persona has been moved to an electronic format. And if you're someone, and you hear people talk about it, they say, oh, I'm much better in person. I do so much better with people in person. Well, there's a reason for that. They have a comfort level around people. They need to see facial expressions to have that conversation and such. And so we've now moved all of that online, and Zoom helps a little bit. You can see, people's reactions sort of, but it's still not quite as real time as when you're standing next to each other. And so you've got to really project yourself across this medium and let people see how it is that you react and what you do, but also where your strengths are. What are you doing to make the best of this situation? How is it that you're going forward? If you're working on a team, how are you contributing? How are you helping problem solve and really look at what are the different things that it can do? As a personal brand, you also have to be thinking about, what am I putting out there? As we all know, once it goes out on the internet, it's out there. And you see the Hollywood all the time is constantly trying to pull things down from social media because of something that goes up that can be damage to someone's personal brand. We forget movie stars all have a personal brand. That's essentially what they are. We don't actually know the real them. I can remember several years ago, and I can't remember who the star was, but they took a photo of her eating a hamburger. She was always professing she was vegetarian. And immediately that set off just a firestorm, and she disappeared for a while. She had to just disappear to rebuild her brand and to kind of establish who she was. So you're absolutely right. Trust is a huge factor in this. Kris, last question for you is, I think you've given a lot of great information today, and obviously there are people out there that would be interested to learn more about it. How do people get a hold of you?
People can find me online at krismarshconsulting.com.
Okay. And we'll be sure and we'll include that web link with the podcast. So if anyone is interested in reaching out to that, any last thoughts or things you'd like to share with the audience?
Just a tip that I use, speaking of authenticity, particularly when you're on platforms that are technology-based, you're not able to be face-to-face with people. One thing that I will do quite a bit is, if I have a thought that I want to share, I will hop onto either the audio recording app on my phone, or sometimes I'll just hop on a Zoom call by myself, and I'll just talk through the ideas that I have, and I'll record myself. And then I'll download that transcript, which is super easy to do, as you know. And I'll use that as a starting point for a blog post or for an article, because I find, even for myself, if I'm starting to write and it's not feeling conversational, it's just feeling way too academic, it's not feeling all authentic to me and expressing what I'm wanting to express, that's a really easy way for me to get a start on writing something, is just to sit down and start talking about it out loud, pull down that transcript and use that as a starting point for that conversational post or article.
That's an excellent idea because oftentimes, too, people get writer's block when they open up that Word document and just see that white blank page staring at them. This gives them a way you're feeling the sense of editing as opposed to starting to write. You may not keep what you eventually put in the transcript, but it's a good starting point. I think that's a wonderful tip to share with everyone. And I think that really rounds out what we've been talking about today, which is when you're looking at your personal brand, when you're looking at a brand for a company, you should be constantly thinking about what do we do different? How do we do things different? And that includes when you have great ideas, writing them down and getting them ready to push out, whether that's on social media or maybe that's a quick email out to your current clientele. So many good things that you've shared with us today, Kris. I so appreciate it because I think everyone is still struggling a little bit to navigate these waters. We're getting better at it, and a lot of people are adopting new things and trying new things. But I think it's always great when you can hear someone who's had success and has also learned some things along the journey. I want to thank everyone for listening today. Kris, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing with our listeners. You've all been listening to EdTech Speaks. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and can make use of the tips and tools you got today. We look forward to having you joining us again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to EdTech Speaks with EdTech strategist Cher Downing. To learn more about the services Downing EdTech and its staff can provide you, find us at www.downingedtech.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it. We'd also like to hear from you regarding any suggestions for topics or guests and the value you received from our show. Check back for new podcasts with featured guests at www.downingedtech.com/podcast.